Welcome back to The Real Build. In this episode, I'm going to be going through the research that I uncovered and the methodology and the thinking behind the angle that I think is going to work, why I came to that conclusion, and some of the things that I'm looking at. So before digging into the research, there was a number of things I was thinking about. One was productized services. Many trade businesses offer numerous services, which makes it really complicated, complex to try and service those because now you've got a huge product line, complexity around deliverability. You've got to have a bunch of inventory to deliver that versus if you look at some of the best companies in the world, what they do is they master the deliverability of a few core high value services. And what that allows you to do is essentially deliver those services in a very streamlined fashion through almost like a direct to consumer sales funnel. There's already products coming out that allow companies to build essentially e-commerce platforms around their trade businesses and customers can add items to cart. The problem with that is most companies that use these end up putting tons of things on the platform like furnace filters and valves and whatever else it may be. And now the customer is left with the same complexity they had when they were trying to choose between your 100 service menu items versus putting it together and packaging those into a complete sellable system, a sales system. So let's say rather than needing a furnace filter, if somebody wants to go and buy a furnace, it includes all of that stuff and potentially putting them on a continuity with furnace replacements and that sort of things instead of those customers having to choose, let's say a furnace filter, their own. So that was a direct to consumer and a narrow product focus. Another one is private equity thinking. If you look at some of the biggest companies that we looked at, companies like Apex, West Shore Home, Leaf, there was a whole bunch we looked at. The companies that are able to become really big, they often do that by private equity roll-ups, buying fragmented operators. You can already see this, how many companies have been purchased over the last couple of years by private equity firms. Another one is technology. As I said in one of the last videos, AI is revolutionizing what we can do, which is allowing little operators to essentially build their own tools and not be at the reliance of these large SaaS companies like Jobber, Service Titan, or any of the other ones that you might be used to using. Sure, those might be great platforms, but now you're having to use what they offer, pay exceedingly expensive fees to use them versus just bringing that all in-house, building custom exactly what you need. So let's dive a little bit deeper into this. So the executive thesis that I came up with here, the winning strategy is not by trying to do better than all of these or copying what each of these individual businesses does, but rather taking components of each and putting them together in one company. What I'm looking at doing is essentially rather than trying to acquire a customer, we want to acquire a home because a home has so many different needs. They might need a furnace, a hot water tank, a roof, landscaping, and the list goes on. Sure, there's companies out there like Angie, Thumbtack, Home Advisor, Neighborly, but where they are lacking is that they don't control the full process. And there's an underlying strategy that we're going to talk about in a future video that I've uncovered, which I'm calling the home graph. And this is what I'm going to be using as the acquisition strategy or part of it to start acquiring data on the homes to be able to allow us to recommend products data backed rather than trying to advertise on something like Google AdWords with speculating when somebody might need something versus knowing that, let's say they have a 20-year-old furnace and it's going to need to be replaced, especially if we're monitoring that with some sort of IoT device. These are all going to go into the strategy, which we're going to get into as I start building this. Obviously, this is aspirational. I've got a big idea of what I want to do. Of course, execution is going to play a crucial role in actually succeeding at this. So as I said, here's some of the companies I looked at: Power, West Shore Home, Leaf Home, Resi Brands, Zephyr, Apex, Turnpoint, Neighborly, Authority Brands, Wilson, GoLime, Right Time. So the reason I looked at all these, and I've kind of already said, is because each of these does something really well or a number of things really well, and we want to take what works best from each of them. So for example, Power Home Remodeling, they use a technology that they have built. They offer a finite number of products, and because they've got their own proprietary software, they can collapse the sales process, which is a big way that you could maximize your profit and margins. If you look at the traditional sales cycle with a lot of home service companies, it often involves some sort of sales call or estimator to go on site. However, if you can collect the data first, meaning pictures, measurements, and other things like that, you can package your systems into flat rate productized services, and then you can eliminate the estimation and simply sell that direct to consumer. Another one is West Shore Home. This is another limited fulfillment. You'll start to see this theme between all of these is they often sell a limited number of services, but this one was interesting because part of the idea I had and what I just mentioned was how do you capture data to allow you to estimate without going on site? And that is visual recordings, LiDAR, that sort of thing. And how do we capture that? Well, what does everyone have with them? A cell phone. So of course, if you can somehow get the customer to record their mechanical room, and then we're using LiDAR or something else to map the room, if we've got pictures of the brand of furnace, for example, the venting, all the other things, this is going to allow us to gather a lot more data and be a lot smarter in our sales technology. Next is Leaf Home. Probably seen commercials, Leaf Fitter. They do a lot of direct to consumer consumer, a lot of native advertising. And this is another strategy that we're going to look at is in-house media and building a media brand rather than being a home service business that has to hire an external marketing agency, which obviously involves another layer of overhead, which is going to decrease the margin, which, as many of you may know in business, whoever can acquire the customer is going to win. And obviously that means you have to be able to pay more than everyone else. And in order to do that, you have to have larger average order values and larger lifetime value of the customer. And that all relates back to understanding the data, knowing what they're worth to you, knowing what you can spend, and minimizing the amount of money you have to spend to deliver the service. So you got higher margins and more to spend. So the direct consumer is important, and the self-funded media, the media brand, is going to be important too. That's not just paid media, that's organic. Some home service companies are now starting to build media, build social platforms, build shows around their brand. And that's hugely important because organic is going to collapse the cost of acquisition. It's also going to make you less reliant on platforms like Google, because once you build a customer list, you've acquired that customer, and that's going to be your cheapest form of advertising because you've paid to acquire them. And now you can market to them again and again and again. Resi Brands, another one. This is a franchise. They partnered with Codie Sanchez, who obviously has a huge media personality, huge brand. And this is what I talked about with Resi Digital, or having an in-house media. Zephyr, this company, they've been able to acquire lots of fragmented home service operators. They have a centralized control so that they can manage dozens or hundreds of brands from one central location, which also has the benefit of all that data is flowing uphill, which means now they start to see it across all of their portfolios versus an individual operator only seeing a small subset of what they serve. More data is going to allow you to decide when to deploy new capital on different parts of your business. Maybe that's new technology, where to deploy capital towards profitable ad spend. Maybe you need to take over a new territory. And if you know beforehand that it's going to be profitable, then you can borrow money without putting too much risk up front. So again, data, capture data. Apex, same thing, large private equity. They've used mergers and acquisitions to build really quickly. So as you can see, we went through a whole bunch. And if we scroll through this document, you can see it's got a lot. I said last time, I think it was about 80 pages. We're going to be getting into all of this, but this is essentially going to be the foundation that I'm going to follow in order to start building this out. And step number one is researching the local market to see where's our entry point wedge. Again, I don't want to start by thinking, what are the 10 services I can provide, or I'm going to start a plumbing company or an HVAC company, and that's what I'm going to do, because that is not very narrowly focused, which means messaging is diluted. I don't know what to sell, versus uncovering a lot of research, picking one core product that is potentially high value, enough demand that we can capture, and start proving the concept of the home graph, which I'm going to talk a lot about in the next coming videos. If you want to see how I'm using all of this together and what the home graph is and why I think it's going to be a powerful strategy, then tune into the next episode where I'm going to be getting into the opportunities that I've uncovered, how I uncovered them, and where the business is going to be going after. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next episode.